My guest is Elizabeth Talma Sankar. She is the PRO of the shelter. It is really good to have you. Thank you for taking the time this Sunday morning to come in with us.
Thank you very much for having us, and it's always great to hear people highlight this scourge, I call it, not a situation that we have in Trinidad and Tobago.
It's a scourge that's not new. It is being highlighted in many areas, and we're glad for that. But particularly now, during an economic downturn like the one we're experiencing, many personal issues become emphasized and they take on a higher profile. The inability of people to pay mortgage, the strain of individual savings, the domino effect that it has on families, breakups, divorces, domestic violence, education of the children. A whole lot of things sometimes would make an average person lose their mind. But when you have one who is either weak or has a disposition to exert physical force on someone else, or if they are in advantageous position, if they are the single provider for the varied reasons domestic violence can present itself. The question is, how are we treating with this? And we know that numbers are kept, but they are not the best numbers in the world because, on the best day, Trinidad and Tobago and the CSO remains in a challenging situation. However, the UNDP did say that you can look at some of the solid numbers you have, albeit limited, as an indicator of what's going on in your society.
Right.
So my question to you is, the shelter, you cannot depend on those numbers, but do you go further afield? Do you go out to the houses? Do you get on to families? And if you don't, how do they get on to you?
Okay, we have a fabulous hotline in Trinidad. It's the domestic violence hotline. It's 800 SAVE, 800 SAVE. Anyone that needs help can call that hotline. They have very well trained listeners, and they are then able to ascertain your situation, and they will then help you get out of the situation if you are willing to. Now, not all people that make the call are ready at that particular time to leave their home, because remember, you are the victim, but you have to leave the situation instead of the perpetrator being made to leave and leave the mother and the children in the home. 800 SAVE will streamline it for you. We have the police that if once they're comfortable to go to the police, they will also direct it to us. We have Families in Action. We have Childline, which is 800-4321. They also get calls from adults. You also have the Victim Support Unit. Now, if someone does call our shelter directly, we need to channel it through the domestic violence hotline.
I see. Okay.
Because they will be able to say, okay, in the month of March, we had so many calls that came in, so many were placed in shelters, so many did not want to go into shelters.
So setting it through that way, that affords the coordination, as it were, and the accountability. You mentioned a point there that's interesting, because you said if you're comfortable going to the police. It is one of the reasons I asked you if, in fact, the resources were available for the shelter to go into areas and speak to families directly. I understand your explanation thereafter. What, to your knowledge, is being done to, and is it satisfactory? I know the police did articulate that they have an initiative to sensitize the police to better understand how these domestic violence reports should be treated and so on. Are you happy with the progress being made to make our police desks in the police stations something more accommodating to those who are victims of domestic violence?
Well, all that they really need to do is to go back to how they used to be. When I first started with the shelter, which was 19 years ago, we had what we call the community police service, which were trained officers to deal with family violence. Some smart person came along one time, I'm not sure who it is, and decided that it might be best if they broke up these units and integrated them into the police stations. Now, you have to remember, all of these, they had their own section. So if I wanted to make a report, I didn't have to go into the police station. I went, it might be another entrance, but I was not seen going into the police station. Well, that didn't work. And I think what they are doing now is strides to go back to be how we used to be. And Not every woman or man. Can you imagine a man being abused by his wife or his girlfriend and he has to walk into an
Yes.
open police station?
Yes.
It's not right.
And that's part of the training we're talking about, because
Yes.
the common perception is that when you talk domestic violence, it only comes one way. It does not, in fact. So now we take them away from walking into the glare where there are many other people wanting to complain about what they're doing. Usually you cannot speak quietly. You're not in a microphone talking to a police officer. So when you start telling your story, every Tom, Dick, and Harry, they're hearing. And you
Yes.
say now they're going back to the old way of
Yeah.
doing that. Have there been instances where a person would come to the shelter and speak to someone there in violation of a restraining order? Once folks get to the shelter, I need to understand, once they have been sent to the shelter, what protection is there? Because there was a report only this morning that spoke to of a complaint by an occupant of one such place, that it is a roof over their head, and that's all that they get. Now, other reports, of course, say that they are provided for in many different ways. So deal with that for me, if you will. When we say a shelter, and someone is referred to the shelter, what happens? What are they afforded?
Okay, well, I can only speak for our shelter, but I think I'm speaking on pretty much most of the shelters that I know about. And as far as I know, there are 13 registered shelters between Trinidad and Tobago. You are referred to the shelter. Nobody can just walk into the shelter. It is a safe house, and we do not give out the address. I'm not saying that people don't know where it is. I call it the best kept worst secret in Trinidad and Tobago. So you arrive at the shelter. The person that is referring you, it's normally a police officer, a social worker, a medical social worker that will be bringing you up. You are handed over. You are registered. Depending on the situation that they come in, we have a series of questions that need to be asked. Sometimes they're not capable of answering those questions right away. So we get the pertinent ones. Are you on medication? Are there any allergies? Your children, etc. In case of an emergency, who can we call? And then they are showed to their room. Now, most of our rooms are communal living. They are given everything that they need if they don't come with it. So we have clothes, they get all their linen, all their toiletries and so on. Meals are provided for them. However, they see about looking after their children. Also, as we say, it's a community. It's a communal thing. So our roster is done up with who cooks, who cleans, when you do your laundry. If you need to go to the doctor, you're provided to go to the doctor. If you need legal services, we get someone to come and give you your legal services. If you need to go to the dentist, you get to go to the dentist. No money. Everything is paid for and provided by the shelter.
All right. Now, if in such a case, as you said, it is the best kept known secret. Worst secret. All right. So someone is at the shelter, and they are found by someone who ignores a restraining order, unfortunately, and they find that person there. How protected is this person?
Very well protected.
Okay.
We are completely fenced. Mm-hmm. We have dogs. We have. It's well protected.
How is visitation handled in the case of where there are children?
There's no visitation.
No visitation.
If someone wants to visit their children, we make arrangements for the children to be taken normally to a police station, and that is where the visitation takes place.
All right, so they call, they go to the central distribution area. They send you to the shelter. They send me to the shelter. I'm at the shelter now, and while there, one of the things that folks have complained about is that there is a half-hearted effort to deal with things, because there's always a perception in Trinidad that they will eventually make up. They will make up with the with the person they broke up with. Don't push this situation too far. How does the shelter get families to cooperate and create a support system for this victim after they leave, against the backdrop of that sort of thinking? Because it may not be in the shelter that is the thinking, but the family feel like, y'all will work this out. And the family, in ignorance, don't know how to deal as you professionals would be able to deal with it. And the family support, I think you will concur, is absolutely important upon leaving the shelter.
Yes, it is. One of the things that you must receive when you come to the shelter is counseling. Not only counseling for you, but counseling for your children. When we can afford it, and we can't always afford it because we know Trinidad no longer qualifies for foreign funding because they say that even though we're a third world country, we have first world money.
You used to.
Yes.
Somebody need to tell them.
One of the things that we used to offer was counseling for the families and the perpetrator. Well, we can't afford that anymore. So we deal with the counseling for the victim and the victim's children.
So the perpetrator is no longer a part of this.
Well, we can't afford it, but however, there are one or two places, Rape Crisis Center, as well as the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, that have volunteer counselors that come in. And if they do agree that, yes, they want to go to do counseling, we can call and say, well, could you add this person to your list? Because you can imagine how long their list is. If a mother does indicate to us that she's thinking of going back to her husband or her partner, we get one of our very good police officers, because I want everybody out there to know we have lots of them, to go and intervene and interview him. We then start the process of, if we are sure and he is sure that he wants that and she does, we then start to do family counseling together to make sure that the situation would be okay. Now, believe it or not, in a couple cases that has happened, when the husband feels himself slipping, he calls and he says, is it possible for me to go and get counseling? That is when you know that a family really wants to stay together. I just want to go back on something you said earlier about referring to domestic violence as physical violence. The worst form of domestic violence is the mental part. That is much harder to get through to than the physical, and it starts with the mental and ends with the physical.
A lot of men will make that case. For sure. It's 5 minutes after 11. My guest is the PRO of the shelter, Elizabeth Talma Sankar. We're very happy to have her here. We're talking just before we go into some other questions I have for you, Elizabeth. Could we repeat some of those numbers for our listeners who are now joining us and need to know how they can access not just the shelter, but that central area that you say?
Well, the domestic violence hotline number is 800-SAVE, and Childline is 800-4321. I also know the coalition number off the top of my head, which is 624-0402.
All right, it's 6 minutes after 11. I'm looking at what is happening at the shelter, and there are some questions I have about the intake there. I want to get there just for a moment. Those who are sent to the shelter, is there a window for their recovery, or can they stay 6 months, 1 year? How long are they allowed to stay in a shelter?
That all depends on the situation. You have ladies that come in that just need a break, just to put their business in order, as they call it.
Yes.
So you have that some come for a week, some come for 2 weeks, some come for 3 months. We will not put you out unless you have broken one of the rules. We have certain rules that are set down that you don't do that, because you are now jeopardizing the well-being of the other residents. But we do have the counselors, and the counselor would be the one that would be best to say, okay, this lady is ready to move on. Now, that doesn't happen from one day to the next. We do what we call a monthly case conference, where a member of the board would sit with the counselors and the ladies that actually work one-on-one with the residents. And a decision is made then, well, okay, we feel as though that this one would be able to move on. And we then start working with that person to get them ready to move on. Now, when they come to the shelter, we do applications for them for housing. We do applications to get Social Security. We don't generally take people from the Port of Spain area we get people from outside the Port of Spain area. And the shelters that are outside the Port of Spain area would take people from Port of Spain. That is for security. So lots of times we have to relocate the children because it's important for the children to finish their education. So we get them into schools in town and so on, and we have newspapers, and our house mother would kind of go through and say, listen, I saw some things in here that you might be capable of doing. Why don't you call and make an appointment and go and see if you can see about that job? Another thing, when we used to get the foreign funding, we actually used to be able to train the ladies in doing stuff. And so, of course, we always used to say we wanted to give them a little fishing line so that when they're left, they would be able to do something and not depend on anyone to provide their income for them.
Good enough. I'm looking at some numbers here, and I remember when I spoke with you late last week, you said there may be some revision I may have for you with some numbers, and it could be important here because I'm disturbed by something I read, and you can set me clear in case I misunderstood. There seems to be disparity between 2014, 2015, and 2016 as to the number of abuse victims that have come to the shelter. Am I accurate in my reading of this? Or?
No, that the numbers I told you that were with the telephone numbers of.
With the telephone numbers. All right. So
not
these,
the occupancy.
All right. So the occupancy right now. How many occupants would you say in the shelter right now?
We have 36.
36. Is that not down from previous years?
Not really, because of that 36 we have longer stays, and you would notice that children are up. Now, children can't come on their own. Children come with their mothers. But where you used to have a mother with 2 children, you now have a mother with 5 children. And even though we have 36 occupants, we only have 26 beds.
I see what you're saying.
So what has happened is that we have had to double up the children.
It raises the question, that there was a reason I preceded this question. How is the shelter supported?
Okay. We get, and we are one of the lucky ones that are still getting a small stipend from the government. Besides that, we do 4 fundraisers every year. And besides that, family and friends, it just happens. They just donate. Now, we accept groceries, we accept clothing, we accept linen and stuff like that. And that helps to substitute the income.
And that's specifically why I thought I need to find out that from you. I feel that organizations like yourself doing so much, whatever assistance you can get from people who are like-minded or those who understand the need to have a shelter like yours operating, that we will let them know how they can do that. You get a little stipend from government per occupant, is that correct?
No.
No. You get a blanket amount.
We get a quarterly stipend.
Yes, you get a stipend, but I remember from what I'm reading here, that stipend is not very big. I'm not going to ask you to go down that road, but you are going to need help from the public. And so the public can, in fact, you say, make direct contributions. Is it tax deductible?
Yes.
So tax deductible contributions.
We have deeds of covenant, which are tax deductible. We, one of the fundraisers that we have done in the past is where we do art auctions. So we try to promote the local artists and so on. Of course, that is 150% tax deductible when you buy a piece of local art. When you make a charitable donation to the shelter, that is tax deductible. And we have groups, and oh God, this country is really the best, Every time I feel as though, my Lord, how am I going to make
something
this work?
comes up.
Whoops, it just happens.
I talk very often about the corporate citizen.
Yes.
Talk to me about that. Have corporations been stepping up to assist in this area? I mean, in some meaningful ways. I don't need names. I just need to know, the percentage of them or the number of them this year because of the heightened focus on domestic violence, at least the heightened exposure of domestic violence. Is the corporate citizen or are the corporate citizens stepping up to assist?
We have corporate citizens, and unfortunately, let's say it's a bunch of 10 that helps every charitable organization in this country. So in there's no way that we can get together and say, well, okay, I am from Port of Spain. I will only tackle Port of Spain. You will only tackle Central. It's not like that.
Everybody's out of the same pool.
Everybody's out of the same pool, and they never refuse. They just give what they can. So we are thankful for that.
Yeah, okay. I'm thankful too. It's also tax deductible, just to say. No, it's not a takeaway from the good policies of the company.
Yeah.
It's just to say there's a little quid pro quo going on here.
But one thing I would like to say is that a lot of the people working at these companies now have taken it upon themselves among the staff. And we have seen that more and more this year, to do collections of whether it's groceries, money, clothing, all the things that we need, and call and say, listen, we are doing this for the shelter. Now, another thing that we do is if we don't need it, we say, okay, can we take it, but can we pass it on to someone else? Because there's only so much we can take, and you gotta share.
Which is a good thing. By the way, the list of donations that comes to the shelter, are you allowed to advertise who are your contributors and so on? Do you do that? In other words,
we do.
Yes, I like that because I like the shame game. But without saying it, by putting it up there, folks will understand who which corporation is contributing, which corporation is not contributing. At the end of the day, we are looking at a situation that impacts. It's a small country, Trinidad and Tobago. So if you've got domestic violence in the kind of numbers we're seeing, in any kind of numbers, it's going to impact on somebody else. Either it's going to be their consumers, their customers, or it's going to be the company itself. It's in everybody's interest then to come to the assistance of not just your shelter, but all the shelters generally. Yes. And that is the reason for my inquiry.
Well, when you think of the population of Trinidad and Tobago, and what I know of are 13 shelters, and I'm quite sure that there are more, because, you have good-hearted people that will start something like this, and eventually they now have to get registered and stuff. And I'm sure we have more than 13 shelters.
Approximately how many people would you say, to the best of your knowledge, as the PRO of the shelter? The guest that you're hearing is that Liz Talma Sankar. How many people, to the best of your knowledge, would you say, best estimate, are in shelters right now in Trinidad and Tobago? About?
I would say, okay, we have 36, and they have others that are much bigger than us. So about 1,000.
About 1,000.
Yeah. Women and children.
Women and children, and that's the other thing. The other thing, when you hear one person impacted, we have to multiply that by the by the children that go inside of there. All right. For our listeners, to Liz, any further information you want to pass to them as to how they can assist your organization in continuing to do your work?
Okay. Well, we have two phone numbers, 628-0861 and 628-1116. You can give us a call. We also have a Facebook page. We have a website which will give you all the information that you need, which is www.trinadshelter.com. Very easy to remember. And on that, you will get email address, Facebook page, and we keep updating. We do get a lot of questions coming through the Facebook page, which are answered. People seeking assistance and stuff like that, and we direct them to where they need to go to.
I got a final couple of questions for you. Your shelter no longer provides services to those who are occasioning the harm, so I won't go there. I will, in fact, ask you if the traditional bias in domestic violence is supposed to be on women, as we discussed before. Do you have a lot of men coming to the shelter? Are they allowed in the shelter? Men victims?
No, this is for women.
Only.
Unfortunately, we do not have a male shelter in Trinidad. So when they do call or do send that message on the Facebook page that will come directly to me, I can then say, well, okay, you need to call.
You redirect them.
Redirect them.
Most recently, facilities have been called upon to house victims of the growing problem of human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago. Speak to me about the shelter's participation, or how is that being dealt with, if by your shelter?
Okay, originally we were housing, helping to house victims of, I call them survivors of human trafficking, because they have gotten out. But the dynamic between someone that's brought in by the counter-trafficking unit and brought in by the police service was causing a conflict of interest between the two sets of women.
Mm-hmm.
Our priority and our charter is victims of domestic violence. So if they do need, like if someone has to come into town to go to court, we will help them out with that. But you also have the language barrier because the majority that are brought speak a different language.
I know it's difficult to quantify this, but I'm going to ask, to the best of your knowledge, what would you say is the success rate at the home? This is of reincorporating people, getting them back to families, that sort of thing. Is that, I know that's a little difficult to quantify.
No, that's not difficult.
It's not. Oh,
at
good,
all.
please.
I would say that more than 90%.
More than 90%.
Yeah, no, not necessarily go back to their family, yeah? But they become
Resolution and
independent. Yeah, a
independence.
resolution is
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I can only thank you for taking the time to be with me. Liz, Talma, Sankar, don't be a stranger. I will be hitting that telephone
anytime,
again.
you just call me and I'll be here.
I thank
and
you
I
so much.
would also like if there's anyone of companies out there that need anyone to come in and speak and just give you little clues and stuff, because there are things that I really can't talk about.
Oh, I like the sound of that. So, in other words, the shelter is disposed to send someone to speak in the workplace against these issues.
Correct.
And folks can get in touch by doing the 628-1116.
That's actually my number.
Oh, that's your number.
The other number is 628-0861.
628-0861 for any company would like to bring in somebody to speak on domestic violence. They can call the shelter 628-0861 and speak to you. I did leak out your private number. Forgive me.
No, 628-1116 is fine.
All right.
That's
So
fine.
either of the two numbers, 628-0861 or 628-1116, and you can speak to the PRO of the shelter, Talma Sankar. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning.
You are most welcome, and thank you so much for highlighting this situation, and in particular for having us.
It is a joint effort from everyone.
Correct.
Can arrest and hopefully suppress this madness. But it is a part of life. It's a reality we have to face, and we all have a stake in this.
Thank you so much.
I thank you so much. You have yourself a wonderful day. Thank you for coming in.